everybody, it's Claire here from Sewn by Claire, and welcome to the next part in our Christmas in July sew along, and that is the one where we are making the 3 Festive Friends by Sarah Peel for Cool Crafting. So these are the Christmas characters in the Lunar Lapin range, and we've already done a kit opening video for these if you want to have a look and see what's included in the kit from Cool Crafting if you're thinking of buying that from them. I'll put the address up here for you so that you can go and have a look at that should you wish. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is we need to locate the pattern pages in our booklet, and they come within the booklet. And then what I want you to do is take your tracing paper and put that over the top and trace off all of these pattern pieces. The reason why I say to take a tracing of these pattern pieces is because I like to keep my master copy of my patterns intact all the time, and tracing paper is just so cheap, or you can use greaseproof paper if you wanted to, or baking paper, so anything so long as you can look through it in order to trace off the patterns. And the other thing is that if you actually cut out these patterns and then pin them onto your fabric, they're really very stiff. This paper is very stiff to use, and the tracing paper is much more user-friendly, shall we say, and much easier to pin through. So that's what you will need to do. Now, the key to this project is going to be keeping organised, and to that end what I've done is I've just chosen some freezer bags. Obviously you could have different a more glamorous solution if you wish, but this is how I am keeping my pieces together. So I have my Festive Friends body and head in one little freezer bag. I've got Merry Angel, all the parts for her outfit, in another one. I've got Pere Hiver and his details for his outfit in another, and then I've got Florin Longfoot, his outfit in another, and then all of those are going to be kept inside one big baggie or plastic bag, freezer bag, with all of the Festive Friends things in there. So I just wanted to point that out, and seeing on my note as well, I want to say a big thank you to Anne Heldeos as well, who has sponsored the videos for the Festive Friends. So thank you very much, Anne, for your kindness and your generosity in allowing me to make these for you, and for everybody who's watching this Christmas, because I think they're really going to be a fabulous project. So that's what I've done, and this is what I would suggest you do. Have your bags, each of the outfits in one, and you can just then reach for the one you want. I think with this many pieces, if you try and handle them all at once and just trace them all off and have them in one bag, I think it's going to be really easy to get confused. Okay, so that's what I have done for there. So I'll pop the other ones that we're not working on the outfits today. We're just going to be working on making the actual 3 bunnies themselves. And we're going to do some production line sewing as well, which is something that you might not have done before. And that's something called chain piecing. But we'll get into that as we go along. But that's one of the things that we can do, because we've got 3 of the bunnies to make, if you're making all 3, obviously. So therefore we've got, you know, 6 sets of ears to do, 6 arms to do, 6 legs to do, and 3 bodies, so we might as well just have those economies of time where we can. Okay, so you're going to need your pattern, and you're going to need to have traced your pattern pieces off. There is a cutting guideline in the front of the book for the fabric, and we may well look at following that. The other thing that's really important as well is to copy on the any Tailor's tax marks, any crosses, notches. The grain line is going to be important because we're not working with felt, and you'll see that each of the pieces has got a grain line marked on it so that we can check that and make sure that everything is lying correctly on our fabric. The next thing that we're going to do then is we're going to go to the pack, and we're going to take out the calico fabric. So this is the creamy cotton. It's just a little bit of a rough looking. It's not anything that would be used for any of the outfits at all. And we also need our reel of thread from out of the kit if you're using that. If you're not using that, then you need some calico for making, or quilting cotton you could use as well for making the characters out of. It's got a nice firm feel to it, but it's still got that sort of softness as well, that pliability. And then you'll need some corresponding thread to be able to sew with. And so the first thing I want you to do is get your fabric, get your pressing mat or your ironing board, and I want you to give this calico a really good press with steam. So we want to iron out all of these creases, because these little creases here that we can see in the fabric, and certainly across here, if we don't take those out now, then they are going to distort the faces or the features of the characters. And if we happen to cut a face out, say on one of those, or an ear or side of a face on one of those marks, then it's going to show pretty much forever, because once these characters are stuffed, it's going to be very difficult to get any marks out of the actual calico itself. If you want to take it and wash it, you can do. That will help get out the crease marks. But as I say, a really thorough hot iron and a nice amount of steam should, in time, if you do both sides, should take that out. So I'm going to have him go with my little mini iron and seeing if I can get those marks out. And they're coming out most of the way, but I might just need to take it to my big steam iron and just get those marks out. But as I say, I won't start cutting or well, really to pinning my fabric until we've got all of those marks out. The other thing, before you start working with this colour of fabric, just have a look on the bottom of the plate of your iron as well. Just make sure there's no dark marks or any staining on the back there, because if there is, that could easily come and transfer onto your fabric, and then you're going to get a smudge or a mark where you don't want it. So I'm going to carry on ironing this. If you get your fabric prepped as well. The other thing that the iron does as well is it takes out any shrinkage from out of the fabric as well before we start cutting out, because if there is any shrinkage, we want that to be out before we start working and cutting out our fabric, rather than when the characters are all completed or we're in the process of making them and we have to press something and then we find that we've actually ended up shrinking one part and not shrinking another. So just a couple of tips for you for when you're working with these and before we get started, just to make sure that you create the very best characters you can from your kit. Okay, so just started laying out my pattern pieces onto the fabric. I have got it double, and I am doing it as the picture in the booklet. And we've got selvage edges across to the right, and then I've got my folded edge across to the left here. There aren't any pattern pieces to cut on the fold, so that makes things easier. And also you'll notice I've only got enough pattern pieces out for 2 characters, so I cut mine as if I was going to do it on the single, but actually I need to do more. But all I'm going to do is pin those pieces on and trace them, and then do a couple more. But if you have traced enough for your 3 characters from the start, then that's all well and good. But what I can see already is that there's plenty of fabric to accommodate those extra pattern pieces, so I'm not particularly worried that I'm going to be short of fabric. Also, the calico fabric I don't feel so precious about as I do about some of the wool felts and those types of things, because it's fairly inexpensive and readily available, so I'm not going to worry too much about that. The one thing that I am doing though is that you'll notice we've got grain lines on each of the pattern pieces, and that's denoted by this long straight line with an arrow at the top and at the bottom. And what I'm doing with mine is I am extending them further up the length of the pattern piece. So originally it would have finished here, and I'm extending it up to the top up here. And all I do to do that is pop a ruler on the, or a straight edge on the existing line, and then just follow it up to the top, and then I just put the little arrow at the top there. What that means is we're going to use this to make sure that our pieces aren't twisted on our fabric, and the longer the grain line, the more accurate you'll be with getting that placement right. So just go through and just pop those, even on the ears, on everything that's got this grain line, just extend it further down on all of your pattern pieces as long as you can do. On the head you're going to struggle slightly because you've only got a small space, but all you can do with that one is measure in further. So I measure with my quilting ruler. I'm going to put the 1 inch mark onto the top of the existing line, and I'm going to draw another line here, and I can go right down to the neck and right up into the forehead here and make that much longer. Let me show you. So there's my existing line. I'll put the 1 inch line on that one, and then here I can draw a much longer line to make sure that that's going to be straight. So there's the original line. Let me show you this one just here. and then here's my new longer line. And you'll see why that's important in a moment. And that's a good practice to do on dressmaking patterns, whether it's for children, adults or toys. And it just makes sure that your pattern piece doesn't get, paper pattern piece, doesn't get twisted when you're laying out your patterns. So I'm just going to do that on my fabric pieces, and then I'm going to start and lay this out and draw it round some of the shapes in order to give it. And I'm going to use my Frixion pen, which is an erasable gel pen. Don't know if that'll focus on there for you, but it just means that the marks line out, so that's not a problem. I don't use my Frixion pen to mark the crosses. I'm just going to use it to mark the outline, because all of these will be machine sewn, and therefore any Frixion pen will be contained within the seam allowance and won't be visible, and I can iron it off if I'm concerned at all that that's going to show through. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead now, extend those lines, and I'll come back to you when I've got my pattern pieces pinned onto my fabric. Okay, so I've just started to put all my pattern pieces down, so I just want to show you how I'm starting to lay this out, and I am following the layout in the book. So the body is actually made up of 3 parts, so we've got 2 there because it's double, so 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So for the 3 bodies we need 9, so there's 1 piece of body that will get discarded and just used as scrap. For the ears we need 12 because there's 2 ears per character and there's 3 characters. So we've got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. So we're happy with that. And I've started to draw around some of mine and then pinned on the other ones. But I just wanted to show you how I use the grain lines on the legs for you, because that's a nice long piece that we can see. And also we'll probably do a head as well, just so you can see the difference between, oh no, we'll use the original lines. That'll be easier, won't it? So we've extended our lines down to the length of the pattern piece rather than just leaving it at the front. And I'm going to now just roughly lay that onto my fabric, and I try and go as close to the edges as I can do. You'll notice on this fabric here it's not quite being cut on the straight, so there's a bit of an overlap here where it's not been straight, but I've put the selvage edges together, which is the important thing, because there's no point as matching up the cut edge and then trying to grain line and get those grain lines straight, because it just will send it off again. The other reason why we're spending so much time with working with our grain lines is that if ever you've made a character and the leg is kind of twisted and doesn't want to twist and sit straight, that's generally because it's not been cut on straight of grain. Felt is different. Felt doesn't have any grain, but when you're working with fabric, especially like a calico where it's got a really strong warp and a weft fibre, you need those fibres to be straight. You don't want them to be twisted, otherwise it'll always stay on the wonk, as they say, or stay twisted. So what I do is I've extended those grain lines, and then I'll put a pin in the middle as like a pivot point, just to hold that pattern piece in place for me. And then take a tape measure, and it doesn't matter whether you're working closest to the selvage edge or closest to the folded edge, one of those two. You don't do it against the cut edge, it's only against the bound selvage edge or your folded edge that you're going to use this. And to fold the fabric, we've put the 2 selvage edges together. And then what I do then is I measure so I put the edge of the tape measure onto the line that I'm drawing. Hopefully you can see that. I've drawn, and then I use my fingernail just to mark it. So that's 6/8 of an inch, that is, away from the edge. So then I come down to the bottom of my line and I measure again, and that's actually at 7/8 of an inch. So I know that's not straight. So I can twist my pattern piece now until I've got my grain line is on the 6/8 of an inch point, and then I put a pin in it to hold it steady. Then go to the top again and just make sure that that's still at 6/8 of an inch, and it is, and I put a pin in that to hold that steady too. So I get all of my pattern pieces trued up first, because then you can take out the one in the middle. Trued up first like this, so when I'm doing my next one, I'm going to flick it round the other way. Again, I put that really nice and close. I put a pin in the middle without taking too much fabric, just as a pivot point, because can you see how that pattern piece can then twist, depending on how we need to anchor it up. If you don't put a pin in, as you adjust one, the other one's going to go out, and you're going to be playing that constant battle. So with a pin in, you can just tweak it slightly. So again, let's measure from here. So that's 3.2 inches. So 3 inches and 2/8 of an inch. It doesn't matter whether you use centimetres or inches. I just find inches easier because it's bigger markings on this one. And then we go down to the bottom of the line here, and I can see that that's 3.2 as well. So I got that one pretty straight away. So now I can put my pins in to hold that one in place and take out my middle pin now. So again, I just work on that basis. Let me just show you one that's off for how you can straighten it up. So you might lay a pattern piece on, and without the grain line, you might think it's okay, especially with these curvy pieces where where you've got a lot of curve on the, you know, so it goes from thick down to thin down to the ankle. So you might think you're straight. So when you measure at the top there, you'll see that there is 4.9 inches. But when I come down to this edge, it's only 4.1 inches, isn't it? So we know that piece is wonky, and you might say, yes, I can tell just by looking at it. But that's where then we can just straighten it up. In this case, I'll move it closer because I try to keep mine all as close as possible. And then we can straighten that up, and we can be sure then that when we're working with fabric, we're on the straight of grain, and that's really important. It is a bit of an extra step. Yes, you can just plonk all of your pattern pieces on and cut it out, but these festive friends, they could be here in 20 years' time. So let's not have something that's going to irk us and you know, sort of bother us for the rest of their existence, really. Let's just take those extra minutes now, and then that's all done then for you for the rest of the time. The other reason I said about extending the line is because if you go to the top of the line here, and then you go down to the line there, you might think it's kind of straightish. It isn't enough length in order to make sure that it's as straight as possible. And if we come down here, that slant is exaggerated the longer your grain line is. So that's why I advocate for having as longer grain lines as possible. And yes, I'm labouring the point, and I'm really sorry. Well, I'm not sorry really, but this is why you're watching these videos, to get the very best out of your sewing. And so if you can take on board some of these tips and tricks, I think over time they'll build to a body of knowledge that will help your sewing generally. So I think that's why I labour some of these points. I'm not trying to be annoying. It just really is that important. Okay, so especially if you're using fabric for the first time to make your characters, and previously everything's been made in felt, because there is no grain line with felt, you can put anything on the angle that you want, just to use your fabric as best as possible. But this is the transition you're making now onto a woven fabric, and as I say, that's why we get all this fraying at the edges of the pieces, because that's how we can see how at right angles those two sets of fibres are, the warp and the weft. Or the weft and the warp, I always forget which way round it is, but I know they're there and I know we need to work with them. So, likewise with our pattern pieces, everything is either going north to south or south to north. So you can have a head pattern that way and you can have a head pattern that way. I'm not going to be concerned about that at all. But if you have one head pattern that way and you put one sideways, or maybe it's easier to look at with the arms, whoops, losing my pattern pieces. So we've got two arms here, so if you put them both that way or you have one that way and that way, I'm not concerned at all. But as soon as you start having one that way and having one that way, you're going to run into problems. You need them all to be cut in the same direction, and this is really important if you're working with a fabric with a nap like a velvet or a corduroy, which you might be in the future. So that's why we're paying attention to this now. Okay, lecture over. Let's carry on laying these down and pinning them onto our fabric, ready for cutting out. There's one more thing that I've just thought about as well. Please don't start and cut out any of your pattern pieces until you've got everything all laid out, and that you've checked against the picture here as well to make sure that everything is laid out and you've got the correct number. So count them to make sure that you've got the right amount. And as I say, you need 5 body pieces, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, because we've got they're each on a double, so we need those, but you need 12 of your ear pieces. It's little things like that that can catch you out, and if you've not laid everything out first of all, and you've double checked it to make sure it's all there, and you cut something out, especially on a kit where you've got a set amount of fabric, and this is going to be really important when we start working on the clothing for these animals, characters, then you need to make sure you've got enough fabric before you even start cutting anything out. Okay, that's it then. Just one thing I've noticed as well as I've been laying all these pattern pieces out, bearing in mind my previous point about the grain lines, and if you look, all of these pattern pieces have all been placed, sorry I couldn't get the right word then, placed north to south if you look, but look at the arms, east to west. So I am actually going to turn my arms round, and because I can see I've got plenty of fabric here, so I've got my arms here, and I'm going to have those going north to south, exactly the same direction as my other pattern pieces. So you'll see in the pattern they're all stacked that way, east to west, but I'm going to turn mine and have mine north to south, and then I've got enough room to fit another 2 up here, and plenty of room here for the 3 heads that I need, 3 sets of heads that I need to cut out there. So just that little, I keep saying just a little point more, but again, all really important, and until I get to those stages, then I don't find these things out. So as soon as I find these things out, I'm coming straight to you to let you know. Okay, so I've got all of my pieces out. I've got a nice blank piece here that's going to be a nice spare piece just in case we do mess up on any of the character pieces. It's always good to have that little bit of insurance. Now I'm happy that I've got all of my pieces on the fabric. You can either draw around your pattern pieces like I've done and then cut them out. You could also use a rotary cutter if you wanted to, but there are some tight curves to get round, so it just depends on how you're most comfortable cutting out. If you've drawn round your pieces, just remember to keep your pins in place, because although you've taken the pattern piece off, you still need pins in place to hold these pieces of fabric together so that they don't shift as you're cutting them out, because if you haven't done that, then there's a chance that they might shift as you put in your scissors underneath, and then when you try and lay them on top of each other, they're then not going to be the correct shape for you, and then you'll be into your insurance fabric there. Okay, so once you've got all of those together, go ahead and cut those out, and then come back to me, and then we're going to be looking at notches and tailor's tags. Okay, so I finished all of my cutting out. This is the space that I've got spare, the piece of fabric I've got spare from managing just to adjust the way they were cut out. So I'll save that. That's my insurance fabric, just in case anything else goes wrong. I've also saved one of the bigger pieces of scraps, because we'll use that to test our tension of our machine and our stitch to make sure that we're happy with that. So that's just to one side. And then we've got our piles of our pattern pieces. Yours will probably still have the paper pattern on, and that's fine because we need to use those next for doing the notches and the tailor's tags. So first of all, let's start working, say, with our legs. So on our legs, I'm going to pop the pattern piece back on top here, so that I've got that all ready. And for this, you're going to need something with a sharp point. I like to use my snips, which are here. Sorry, I should have had those ready. Okay, which are like these, because they've got a really sharp point to the blade. And what I do is I just lay the pattern piece over the top. You might still have your pin. Make sure it's right top and bottom. And then we're going to just do a little nick in the fabric, just at those 2 points. And what that little nick in the fabric does, it just gives us a reference point just for moving forward. You need to be careful because these are such small pattern pieces, and we'll only be using a small seam allowance. Let's have a look and see what the seam allowance is going to be. On the ears it's 1/2 centimetre, which is about 1/4 inch, I believe. Yeah, 1/2 centimetre, 1/2 centimetre. So yeah, so 1/2 centimetre is a tiny amount. So yeah, about 1/4 inch, isn't it? So we need to make sure that you don't make those marks any bigger than 1/4 inch, because if you do, you're going to cut through into the main body of the part of the body that way we're going to be able to see them. So you just need a little reference point that's just on there. So you're going to go through all of your pattern pieces and find all of your nicks. There's none on the ear at all. There's just 2 on a leg. Now there's a few on the body. There's 2 either side here and 2 either side here, and then there's 1 on the bottom as well. So make sure you get all 5 of those. On the arms there's just 2, which is for turning it through. So again, we can do those. and on the head we haven't got any. So go through now, work out your pattern pieces and do all of your nicks, because then we're going to come back and then we'll do all of the tailor's tacks. Obviously, if you're more experienced, you can do them all at the same time, but I do find that if you do your little snips first and then come back and do your tailor's tacks, you don't then miss any, which is the important bit, because we need those clues for when we're putting this all together. The other thing is that you will have noticed is that this fabric frays like crazy and just wants to shed all of those fibres. And if you're not careful when you're working with these, your pieces will get smaller and smaller just by the nature of the fibres coming away on them. So try to handle them really carefully and try not to be too rough or aggressive with them. And if you can, and it's possible to leave them set out, then leave them set out as well, so that you not keep shoving them in and out of bags all the time, because that will impact on the edges and just how damaged they get. And once they're sewn by machine and inside the character, it's not going to matter at all. But whilst you're working with them, we don't want those pieces to shrink anymore, because they're already fairly tiny, aren't they, to be working with. So go ahead and let's put all of your nicks. I would suggest you work with each pattern or each body part at a time, and then you're doing the same for that set number of pattern pieces. Okay, see you in a minute for doing tailor's tacks. To thought whilst you're making your snip marks as well, if you are using scissors, and obviously these are really big ones, but don't do your tailor's tacks halfway down the blade like that in order just to do that little snip. Only use the nose of your scissors in order to do your little snip. The reason being that if you put a bit more pressure on than you think when you're doing that, it's so easy to snip straight across your fabric. Whereas if you're just using something small, or you're just using the nose of the blade of the scissors, you can put that little nick in without any worry about cutting straight through your fabric. Okay, so now we've got all of our little snips marked. What we need to do now, or notches marked, is we need to do the tailor's tacks. So take your pattern piece, and you've either still got it on or you've taken it off, whichever. So just make sure that that's on, and make sure that it's lined up perfectly. It needs to be perfectly lined up. Mine's just off at the top, look, just slightly, so just twist that and put that on. Okay, because this is going to mark the placement for the heads, for the eyes and the ears. So we're going to do a tailor's tack. So I've got a hand sewing needle, and I've got a length of thread through it, and my thread is double. I've put the two ends together. Mine's a long piece because I know we're going to be doing lots. And so in order to do a basic tailor's tack, you've got your fabric's double still. You're going to go in at one end of your cross and then come out at the other. In this case, I'm going to east to west first, but it doesn't matter if you go north to south first. It doesn't matter which way round. And you're going to leave a little tail of about 1 inch long. Okay, you're then going to turn your pattern piece, and then you're going to take another stitch, and that's going to go in the opposite direction. And you're going to pull that through your fabric, mine's got caught on the pin, until you've got a loop that's about 1 inch long. So it matches the length of the tail you left after the original stitch. So mine's just got tangled up a little bit, but there it is. Okay, and then what you do is you snip off the thread, leaving about another inch as well. So you've got this like loopy kind of thing going on, and then all you do is you cut through the loop. Okay, so that's one tailor's tack made. So let's do another one, because we've got another one on the nose. So let's put a first stitch through, and right the way through to the end, leaving about 1 inch, and then the opposite direction going through, and then we pull that through, and we leave that until the loop is about 1 inch long too. And then we snip off our tails and we snip through the loop. So on here we've got two tailor's tacks. So we've got this section here for the nose, and we've got this section here for the eyes. And if you look on the other side, you can see very clearly the crosses that we've made with those stitches and how big those stitches are. The centre of the cross there is the centre of the cross here. So that's how we can be so precise. So now we can take out our pattern, take off our pattern, and if you just hold on to the threads with your finger as you're taking your pattern piece off, that will make it easier. Make sure nothing gets pulled out. And then we've got the place marked on the front, and we've got the place marked on the back. but we've got 2 pieces that we need to separate. So what you have to do now is lay it down on your work surface, and then you're going to ease up, and this is why we need to be careful with these edges, that we don't sort of handle them too much and then they don't fray on us. We're going to ease those stitches across until you've got a bridge of stitches. You see that bridge of stitches in the middle there between the 2 bits. So I've still got tails left on one side, I've got my bridge of stitches in the middle, and I've got my little cross on the other side. And then you'll take your snips or your scissors and you'll cut through those bridges of threads just very carefully so you don't pull any out. And then what happens is that you can separate those 2 pieces, look, and you've got those bits marked on each side. I wouldn't do any more than your double fabric at one stage. Don't try and go through 4 pieces because, in my experience, having tried, it pulls the threads out too far. So you do have to be careful with these, that we don't then pull these threads out of place as we're sewing with them. But that's why we've got a contrast, so we know the red threads have got to stay in. I mean, the nose and the eye are going to stay in quite a long time compared to our stitching. So let's do this other one again. So we're just going to pull that apart till we get a bridge of threads. Make sure you've still got some threads on the other side, and then we're just going to snip through those just carefully. And then we can finally separate those 2 pattern pieces, and we can see that all of those marks are on there where we want them to be. That's just a loose bit of thread. There we go. So that's that one done. So now I'm going to put them back together again the way that they were. So we're going to go through the same with the leg placement as well. Just all of those tailor's tacks are all the same. So on the leg, we put our pattern piece back on again to hold that in place. We've then got our cross to go through on our leg. So just go through the same way, leave a tail about 1 inch. And you get really quick at these. I know I've laboured them and done them really slowly just to show you, just to demonstrate. But once you get used to doing these, it's really good, and you've got no worry at all about your ink not coming out of your fabric if you've used a Frixion pen. And those, as long as you don't go and pull those threads out or have a very helpful child nearby who thinks you've left a thread in your sewing, then these should stay in whilst we're just working on our pattern pieces. So just go through and just mark all of your tailor's tacks the same way. Okay, so once you've got all of your tailor's tacks done and you've got all of your notches marked, we're on to the sewing. The first thing we're going to do is take our piece of sample fabric that we've got, and we just kept an offcut. And I've loaded up my machine with the cream thread, the cream thread that's come with the kit, so that we can have a go at testing our tension. So we're going to just pop that underneath. I've got a size 17 Microtex needle in from Schmetz, which is my favourite needle. You can use any of your needles you've got, but you want one with a nice point on it so that you're sewing with, so these stitches just form nicely. You can just have an ordinary needle for wovens, that's all fine. Just make sure that if you haven't changed it for several projects, that you perhaps do change it for this new project. I do recommend that you do that so it's nice and new. I've got my tension set just above 5, my stitch length is 2.2, and I'm just going to have a quick sew and just have a look and see how my stitches are forming. So let's just go ahead and just do that. So if we look at the top, so if we look at it first, when it first comes out of the machine, I can see that's lying nice and flat with no puckers in it at all. So if you put it down on your work surface, you can see that that sits down really nice and flat. It's not wavy, excuse me, like this. And it's not tight either, the stitches aren't bunched together, that's the top. If we turn it over, we've got some nicely formed stitches on the back there as well. So all nice and straight again, and nice and even. No loops, no loopiness. And then if we separate the 2 sections, so we're pulling them apart from each other, just smooth your finger down it, then you can see a little bit of a gap between, but those stitches are nice and tight. And what you want is that so the 2 edges are sitting nicely together, nicely butted up against each other, and that they're not too gappy. So that's just something just to be aware of, because if we pull them apart quite a lot, then we can see the gap in between, but that's fine. We just want something that's just going to sit just really nicely once it's sewn on this fabric. And to be fair, calico is really easy to sew on. If you find that you've got quite a lot of room between your stitches when you pull them apart, that means your tension needs to be higher, which is normally a dial around about here. And what that does is it squeezes together the tension discs as the thread's coming through from the reel, and it just makes it go through a little bit slower, and that will then make your stitches tighter. If you've got any skipped stitches or you've got any ravelling at the bottom, it might mean that you either need to change your needle or that you've got fluff underneath in your compartment. So just be careful of that and just make sure that it's threaded nicely. Okay, I think we're ready to get started. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to sew the ears. Now, this project is going to feel like it takes longer than your normal projects because you're sewing 3 characters all at once, and we're going to mass produce these. I think there's some economies of time from doing them all together, but at some point during this process you are going to think, is this ever going to end? And that's completely normal, so just be aware of that. But the ears, we can do something called chain piecing if we do them all together. So what I want to do is take these, I'm going to move my needle across so that I'm in my position for my 1/4 inch seam allowance, which is what we need. So on my machine, I move my needle position across to number 7. The way I check that is I take my seam gauge or I take my tape measure and I rest it behind, just so that it's in line with my needle, and I just rest where the 1/4 inch or 1/2 centimetre seam allowances, and that's on the edge of my presser foot. So I'm happy then that I've got that in place and that I can then sew, and I'll always have my 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm going to take out the first pin that I've got, line the edge of my presser foot up with the edge of my fabric, and I am going to reverse stitch at the bottom, so a couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches back, and then I'm going to start and sew around this ear. Now, as you've done a few stitches, put your needle down into your work so that it holds your fabric straight. The other thing, that when you've got your needle down in the work, you can do something called pivoting, which is if you lift up your presser foot, you can then move your fabric around, but it won't lose its place because the needle has speared it and is holding it in place. Because as we come round these curves, we will need to do something called pivoting and just change that. So let's follow round for where we can, and I can see my fabric is starting to bunch up under my needle. So I lift up my presser foot, twist my fabric slightly and do a few more stitches until it does the same thing. Lift my presser foot up, a few more stitches, and this is how you get a nice curve. You're trying to do this quite often. Keep to the edge of your ear, and then I'm coming up to the top, so I'm going to take that pin out, and then I'm pretty much straight again, so we can just carry on up to the top. When we get up to the top here, we're going to do stitches, 1 stitch across the point of the ear, and then we're going to come back down the other side, so a little bit further forward first. And this, the 1 stitch at the top there, just make sure that it turns nicely and gives you a nice point at the edge. So again, down here until it starts to gather, and then we twist again, twist in again. And so as you can see, we do have to just do a few little twists just to get down to the bottom of these ears. And then when we're at the bottom, we're going to now reverse stitch. Now, without taking your fabric out of your machine, take hold of your next ear, and we're going to introduce that just into under the presser foot. So this is called chain piecing, when you go from one item to the next. So I'm just going to sew onto this one, reverse stitch a couple at the front, and then we're going to start going around again. So you sew until it starts to bunch, needle in the work, and then you can then sew round, pivot a little bit, and that will help you get nice smooth ears, which is what we want for our festive friends. So again, we're going to go up towards the edge here, so when we think we're about 1/4 inch, and we can check that, leave your needle in your work and twist it round, and I can see I've got too much fabric out the other side, so I need to take probably just 1 more stitch. Yeah, much better. And take that 1 stitch across the top, and then I'm going to come down the other side. So I've got my other one still attached, if you see, that's just flapping around. Just take a little bit of getting used to, but it does save a little bit of thread, which is, you know, you might not be too worried about, but also it just saves you having to stop and just take all of those ears off. And we're going to end up with all 6 joined together. So just reverse again at the end, hold your ears out of the way and get your next one. And we're just going to carry on doing this across all of them. So sew off one and onto the other. Remember to reverse stitch. And just pivot as you have to, just to get that so that it just, the ear, stitching ear is just lovely. One stitch across and then down the other side. So when I say I go one stitch across, I mean across the point. So when you get to the top, don't go into a really sharp sort of V shape at the top of the ear. Just take that one stitch across to almost make it into like a U shape, and that will make it much better. So let me just carry on and do these other three. As you can see what I'm doing, so they're all three attached still, and I'm going to sew the other three on with those attached still and just keep on going. And this is where I say, because you're not stopping and starting all the time, then this is a good way. If you enjoy doing it this way, you do this in quilting quite a lot. Okay, so I've sewn all the sticks and they're all linked together, as you can see. Next thing to do, just take your snips and just separate them all out. And cut off your starting threads. That's the only thread that we've got wasted, which is quite useful. You would have had that on each side of each one. The next thing that we're going to do now is, because we've got curved edges around here, is we're going to do some little snips into the fabric. You're going up to, but not through the stitches. So just say a thread or two away from the stitches. And this just helps the fabric just lay over itself on the inside. And it just helps everything just stay steady. When you get to the top, take off the top point of your ear and just down a little bit down each side. So if I just show you on this one, hopefully you can see there's a, let it just focus. So there's the stitches going up, and then the stitches the other side, and then there's one stitch just across the top, just across there. So that's what we're doing, and then I'm snipping them off so they look like this. So you've got a flat across the top, a bit off the edge, a bit off the edge. Because when we turn these inside out, we need these to then be nice and smooth. And so this is why we do these little cuts. You can also use your pinking shears. So if you've got pinking shears like these, you can also use these. Just make sure you don't go too close to your stitches, because on this calico it can pull slightly. So either little snips like that is good. You can even do your little triangles if you want to, like these. If you haven't got pinking shears, you can just snip things out, triangles out like that. But all of these little tips will make these ears sit nicely for when you turn them out. Because it's on a curve, you have to take some of the bulk out. And if you're not sure why, have a look at one of my skill builder videos, because I've got one on curves and on clipping the curves. Obviously you might want to do this over a bin because it can be a bit messy. If you do by accident go through any of the stitches, just put it back into your machine again and just sew a little bit, just 1/8 of an inch, just inside of that line, away from your away from the cut edge. And what that will do is it'll just reinforce that seam for you just at that point, to make sure that you don't then have a hole in your ears, because we don't want a hole in our ears. I always get a bit rusty when I start filming, so I've had a day or two off, and so apologies if I sound a bit rusty in terms of my descriptions. But give me another 10 minutes and I'll be absolutely fully in my flow and back up to speed again. It's a bit like the Monday morning blues, isn't it? So there we go, that's all of those all sorted, and now I'm going to go back in and just take off some of the excess just on the very points, just to make sure that they're going to sit nicely when we turn them round. So I'll do the ones I've got out of the way. If you want to go ahead and do this, and then we'll be on to turning them. Okay, so I've got all my ears done now. So the next stage then is to turn them around. Now the best way I've found is if you actually go to the middle, rather than trying to go through that little entrance there, if you go to the middle and pull the two sides apart, you can then start to tuck in that bottom edge. Then I take a knitting needle with a rounded edge, poke it over the top, and holding onto the sides of the ears, just gently, just give it a little wiggle down. That's it. and then these will just pull through. Now if you've got your prim turning tools, that's the tools that Sarah recommends that you use. And then we're just going to then just score these along the edge. So you're just trying to find that seamed edge, and you're just running the point of the knitting needle, not jabbing it, you're just smoothing that point along the edge, and it just helps push out that shape. Be careful on the ends, because again you want to be careful that we don't go and do anything to damage those. And then on the ends here, what I would do is I would get a pin, and then just very gently you're just going to ease those points out until you've got your seam sewing line on each edge. Just be careful, don't put too much pressure. You're kind of more teasing it out than you are pulling it out, if that makes sense. I'm nearly there. And then we've got a nice point on the top of our ear. Okay, and that not too bulky either in that centre section, so just make sure you've got all of that out as it needs to be. You should be able to see the stitches from your sewing on the edges, and you're trying not to get any whisker ears where you've pulled threads through. There we go, well, that's even better. Look, a nice point on there. So just do that and just smooth those, because we want that stitch in that seam to be right on the edge of these ears, because they're tiny anyway, aren't they? So we need that to be done. So go ahead to do all of those, and then you're going to take this to your ironing board, and you're going to make sure that you press them so that that seamed edge is right on the very edge of all of them. So that's why we're doing them all together, because we get economies of doing them all together, and sometimes you might not halve the time that you're doing them, but you'd certainly make it a lot quicker when you come to put everything together. So let's just do this other one. We'll just pull the sides apart. I'm just threading it on top of my knitting needle and holding on to the edges. And then oh, that one didn't work, did it? I think I didn't poke it in enough first. So pull them apart. Just take a little bit of fiddling just to get the fabric with your nails, as you can see. And then just tuck that up inside. Then you can use your knitting needle to just go over the top. And then the top of the nice really rounded knitting needle, and then it just pushes all the way through. Pull it all the way down, and then turn your needle around, and then you can gently just start to ease some of it out. Just be really careful, because you will go through your fabric quite easily, and those seams, because the seam allowances aren't very big, are they? So that we've got to just treat it with a bit of respect. And then just use the point of your needle just to smooth along those edges, and then when you've got to a certain point, you can then go back in and just tease out those points. I know I'm repeating myself, but as I say, you go ahead now and do all 6, and then when you've done all 6 of your ears, pull them out like this, take them to your ironing board and press them nice and flat. Okay, so we're just going to press these ears now, so just make sure you've got a nice clean bottom to your iron, because obviously if anything that you've got stuck on there will catch onto your nice lovely cream fabric. As I say, we're just fronting these out. Just make sure they're nice and the seams are at the edges. It does help by just scoring them with the knitting needles. And if you just need to roll any out, just to make sure you can just roll them as well, just sometimes between your finger and thumb, just to make sure that those seams are on the edge. And I would iron them nicely both sides. Okay, that's 2 done. And then we're going to match these up together into pairs as well, so that we've got 2 that look as identical as possible. I mean, hopefully all of yours look all identical, but just check for differences in size or curves or however you've made them, and you're just looking for 2 that are as close together as possible, and then so you're going to get 3 sets of 2, and then that'll help us with our next stages. Because we're going to use the insertion method that's on my channel that's had a lot of views. The video for the ear insertion method has had over 10,000 views. Well, I think it's up to 10,000 views so far. I said over, but I think last time I looked it was just under, so it might be over. And that's a different way of doing it, which makes it slightly easier. So we'll carry on with these at the moment, and then we're going to go on and show you that method, which might be new to how you've done them before. Okay, I'll just put my mat and iron out of the way. We can trim off any thread. So what I would do is just lay them out on the side here so that one's not quite as curvy. So I'm probably going to put that one and that one together. They look about the same. That one and that one and that one and that one. Okay, so I've just got my 3 pairs here. My knitting needles out of the way for the moment. We'll be needing those later. And then we're ready for the next section. The next thing we're going to do with all of our ears is we're going to pull in the outside into the middle, and then we're going to sew across like that. So again, we can, in our pairs, we can chain piece them together. So that's one together. Do I want it that way or do I want it that way? I think I want it that way actually. So just have a look at where your seams are and just make sure that you're happy with how the ears are looking. If you have to go back and re-iron some, do. When you're folding them into the middle, make sure that you're not crossing them over like that, and that you're butting the edges, your seamed edges, up together like that. Hopefully you can see a difference there. These we can just take off, because you don't want that to be you want it to be as flat as possible. And so I tend to put the edges together and make sure they're all there, and then keep your finger on top. And then you're just going to run a little stitch across, don't need to reverse. And if you just do them in order, then you should be able to, do that one that way, then you should be able to just hold them together with your fingers. You can always use your awl as well, but if you hold them further down, they kind of go through okay. We're going to do that for all 6. Try and make sure your fold is in the middle. Oops. I'll do that one again. Just pulling off the loose threads off the end. If they're attached, you can always just use your snips just to snip them off. There we go. So I've chain pieced all those together, and now I'm going to snip just off into their pairs rather than do them singly, because that will just keep them together in the order that I intended till later. It's a bit like a tacking thread, isn't it? Just hold them together. So we've got our 3 pairs of our ears. The next thing that we're going to do now is put those to one side, and you're going to take your head pieces. And we're going to, keeping them, so I've had mine all the, I had them cut mine out with right sides together, so that was fine, so they'd all stay in the same way. If you need to put some extra pins around, please do, just to make sure they all stay together for you. But this calico doesn't tend to budge much, so you should be okay, I think. So again, doing our 1/4 inch seam allowance, and you can see how this goes in at an angle and then starts to come round the nose. So we're going to do the same thing that we've done on our others. We're going to be pivoting with our needle in our work. We're going to sew up to the top here, just there, and then we're going to stop stitching. We're going to reverse there, we're going to join back here and reverse here, and then come down the other side. We are not sewing into this little triangle just here, that's where the ears are going to go. And this is different to how Sarah says it in the book, so don't worry. This is how I found that I can do it, and it works really quite nicely. So we're going to reverse stitch at the neck edge just to make sure that's okay. And we're going to sew in. We're doing now 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then we're going to put our needle in our work so that we can lift up our presser foot, and we can move round now, so we can go round the outside of the ear. Just move your tailor's tacks out the way as best as you can without pulling them out. And then put some pressure on the left hand side here, and then if you need to, lift up your presser foot, just twist it round slightly, because you're wanting to do a few stitches and get it really nice and curvy on the edge of those noses, which is the bit we're doing next. So just take it nice and steady, just a couple of stitches at a time, and eventually you'll get a nice curve round the outside. Don't go too close to your seam allowance, otherwise we'll pop a seam when we're sewing. Just remember to go around the forehead, so there's some shaping there. Then we're coming round to the back of the head. I'm just going to reverse at that start of that triangle. Then I'm going to take my needle out of the work, jump over the gap, rejoin my threads, and a couple of stitches forward, a couple of stitches back to reinforce that starting point, and then we're going to keep, oh, see, I forgot to put my needle in my work. There we go, needle in the work, and then we can then, not often you see me do that, is it? And then we're going to just keep sewing around the edges here. Just doing a curve, nice and gently. And now I can take the pin out because we're pretty much up most of the way round. And you can chain pieces these together. Let me see if I can get my presser foot because it's my pedal. So again, round to the side to get a bit of a point going just here, and then off at the edge in reverse. Needle out of our work, and I'll show you what I've done. So let's take off our threads. Now these might be a little bit more difficult to chain piece, that's why I'm just doing one at a time. So hopefully you can see my thread. So here I've started here, up, I've pointed and pivoted there. That bit there's going to get tucked up inside the head because that's for the neck, isn't it? So that hides the raw edge. A nice smooth line round the nose and then round across the forehead. Here we've got some shaping on the forehead, across to the start here. You can see my threads where I've carried my threads just here. And I can just now snip those off because we reverse stitched at the start and stop of those. And then I reverse stitched again here all the way down, did my little pivot there and then reverse stitched at the end. So you're going to do this for all three heads at this point now. So that we, again, this is what I'm saying about is making all three at the same time. We just go straight from one onto the other and we'll be making three heads all at the same time. And if you've got a lot of gifts to make for people, this is a really good way of making any of the characters. Just do the same job all at the same time because you've got all your machine set up in the way that you need to with your stitches and your stitch length, and everything's all just set up for you, so you might as well. But yeah, let me carry on. I'll do the other two heads to exactly the same way as this, and I'll come back to you. Okay, so we've got our three heads all put together here. And what I want you to do now is either to, first of all, you've got to snip. So snip towards where the V is. So you know the V, so that's the way your head is with your tailor's tacks for your nose and your eye. And just at the point of the neck crease here, you'll see you've got your little V shape. You need to take a little snip up to, but not through those stitches. It's just a thread or two away. And that will just help when we are then turning the character around the other way. And then you want to be either doing your little notches into the seam allowance here, or using your pinking shears are a little bit easier. Just be careful not to take off too much. You're just trying to reduce some of that bulk without compromising that seam at all. You just want to trim it around like that. Okay, so we've gone round for the nose, round the forehead, left the dart open, and then just down the other side here. So do that for all three of them. I'll do those later for you. And then what we're going to do now, before we do anything else, is you're just going to pull apart the edges like we have done before. And that's going to give you a little slit just here in the top of the head. You're going to take a pair of your ears and you're going to make sure they're both facing the same way so that your slants in your ears are together. And then we're going to poke these up through the neck edge until we get to that hole. Just take a little bit of wiggling, but we can do it. If you've got tweezers, you can reach through, or those hermostats, you can reach through and just pull them up. I've not got mine to hand at the moment. Okay, and then when you get to your ears at the top there, in roughly the right place, make sure that the centre of your ears is pointing towards your nose, and then you want to put one ear into either side of those darts, making sure that you've got them both the same way. It's a little bit difficult for me to show, but I will show you in a second. And then you're going to get the edges of the ears level with the edges of your fabric, and you're trying to make sure that the seam allowances on both sides, so for the front and the back of the head, are level. Once you've got there, just put a pin to hold through the head to hold the ear in place, and one of mine has just dipped down inside again. I'll show you in a second on the outside. And this will just hold your ears in place. So let me just show you on this one. So I've pulled the sides apart like this. Oops, like that. And then you're taking your ears and you're poking them in so that you've got these, the open bits of the ears, if you like, the inside of the ears, are facing towards the nose. So that when you line them up with each of your ear, you're going to be on the inside, but you're going to have one either side of the seam allowance and the ears are pointing towards the nose. So I hope that makes sense. Just watch the video back if you're not sure, because it will make sense, but the ears will be on the inside of the head, but I just want to show you. And what happens is that they will actually fit directly inside this section here, and then you can then pull the seam, well maybe not, maybe too small a seam allowance now. We're going to take it to the sewing machine and we're just going to sew straight across this top bit here. So this is in the book. It says for you to do this bit here, which is to sew across the bottom of the ears, which we did. We kept ours in our pairs, and having them joined together like that means that you can't lose one or the other because they're joined together. And then Sarah says to put a ear against a dart and sew that first and then sew round the head, but I found that quite fiddly to get across that top bit without catching the ears. So this is the one way that I found of being able to do that. Just rewind the video back if you're not sure, and then once you've got those in place, we're going to then take out the pins and we're going to sew, but at 1/4 inch seam allowance, but we're going to reverse stitch, and then we're going to go over the other one. Be careful you don't pull out all your tailor's tacks. I pulled out a little bit of one line, and then pull across the top there. That's how it's going to be, where you sew across the top there. I can see my machine's missed a couple of stitches there, so I'm just going to go back in again and just go over that again just to make sure that that's... Yeah, that's better, just got it now. Okay, so there we go. And then what we can do then gently is rather than pull on the ears, I would actually use the ears to push back, just gently. And you're going to push all of this fabric out through that neck edge, just nice and gently, because again this fabric just frays like crazy, as you can see, but hopefully we don't have to handle this too much more and we're going to be where we are. So I'm just using the point of the blunt end, so I've got a nice rounded knitting needle here. I'm just using the end there just to go around the edge. The neck should pop out for you. And again, we should then get the forehead here all nice with the nose sitting nicely. And our ears should then be sticking out to the top of our head. Obviously, we've not stuffed this yet, so it is looking a little strange. But as soon as we get this stuffed and get the shape into it, then that will give us a very nicely shaped head. Okay, with our ears pointing forwards, which is what we wanted. Okay, so let me get this one I'll get the other two done first, and then we'll get these all stuffed, and then we can have a little look at those. But our heads are coming together already, look. Okay, so we've got our 3 heads all sewn, ready to go. So I'm just going to take a little bit of stuffing, and this is where we've got to be careful because we've not got a very big opening just here for putting the stuffing in. So just try and not stretch the heads of the animals, and you can sometimes, she says, push it in using the point of a knitting needle. So if I'm supporting the neck, and then I'm just using the knitting needle to almost just push it in from the side, look. And that will help you just get those filled without stretching that neck. So you can see how I've got the head just supported, the fingers on the back and my thumb on the front. So there's the entrance, and then I can just push that edge of the stuffing in just really nice and gently. And just go from different directions just to get that all in. And these heads will take more stuffing than you realise. It's like all the body parts, and we want them to be quite nice and firm because they're going to be around for a long time. In pride of place every year for Christmas. And so yeah, we just want to push this in as best as we can. So once it gets going, and you see, I don't think it works as well with that end. I think you need the pushing movement, and once you get going you can then use your finger, look. just support this seam, and then you can just push that in. But you are going to be a little bit quicker, but you just want to be careful that you don't stretch that neck edge if you can help it. Then once that's in, we can then start to manipulate. So we've got a little head starting to come together. And if you're not too happy with the join of your ears, don't worry, because don't forget that especially Florin Longfoot has a hat, a green felt and fur hat on. I think there's the details in there to make one for Pere Hiver as well. And I think the Merry has a little halo on as well. So, you know, with them, we can have a look at the instructions, but I'm sure I've read somewhere that there's a little halo for Merry, and if not, we can always make one. So don't get too hung up on how they are, because some bits are the bodies are going to be covered, aren't they? It's really just a frame for the outfits. The outfits are what make the characters, aren't they, really? So there we've got our head starting to come together. It's going to need a little bit more. So go ahead and just keep threading putting all of your threads through. Just be careful with your threads, because I can see that my red threads are showing through on the inside of my character, so I don't want to lose any of those pieces of thread inside there. But we're going to do the faces before we seal them up, so we can always get those bits out, so don't worry. So go ahead now and fill all of your heads as best as you can do and as full as possible, and then we're going to come back and we're going to do the faces next before we sew these, because I like to go in through the neck to hide my threads, and then that will then make those heads all ready, and then we'll be on to our bodies next, and then we'll be on to our limbs. So have fun doing your heads. I hope they come out as nicely as this one is doing, and I'll see you in a few minutes. Okay, so eventually you've got 3 heads, all with their little personalities, and their faces are starting to come through. The thing that I have noticed is that, I don't know if you can see here, but I can see the threads through on my characters' heads. So once I've stitched my heads, I am going to go back in and try and, excuse the car noise, I'm going to go in and take these threads out. So I'll put a note earlier in the video to say to make your tailor's tacks out of a coordinating thread, so that you don't have the same problem that I've got going through mine. It doesn't concern me too much, because as I say, I'm going to be able to find a way, I think, to hook those out, but I'll sew the faces in first, and then that will give me a good starting point, so just let you know. Okay, so once you've got all your eyes together in your head, you're going to head back to your haberdashery kit, and I had to put mine into this little bag because the my little bag broke. And you're going to find your little buttons like these, and there should be 6 of those. So these are the little eyes, and we need 2 eyes per character, so that makes 6. I could do that bit of maths. On some things I'm mathematically challenged, but on counting eyes I can manage that. Okay, so we've got 5 there. Let's just find one more. I've got 1, 2. Now they did stick. Oh, there's one. Okay. So I've got 2, 4, 6 eyes, and that's all we need out of there. There is the brown embroidery floss for doing their noses with it as well, I think. Let's have a quick look, see if they look. Yeah, they look like they're brown. Yes, that's brown. Okay. And the other thing that you could do at this stage as well, if you found your piece of beard for Pere Hiver, we could stitch that on, but I do think it's going to get in the way when we try and do the neck edge, so I think I'm going to stitch mine on afterwards, especially being as it's white thread, so I'm going to leave that bit. Obviously it's up to you whether you want to do that or not. So you're going to have to find yourself quite a long needle. That one looks like quite a nice one, because we want it to be able to go through from side to side and have some space on each one. But your challenge is that whatever needle you choose has to pass easily through the holes on your character's eyes. So in the instructions, I've got a little bit of thread left. It says to double up your needle and thread it, which is always challenging on camera. There we go. And make that double. So do a little quilter's knot at the end here. There is a video how to do a quilter's knot on my channel as well. And that's in the white or the off-white thread. So we've got the little knot at the end. You don't have to worry about it being too neat and tidy, because what we're going to do is I'm going to take a stitch through the stitching, just through the stuffing here, just a couple of stitches, because that'll anchor my thread in. And then I'm going to put my needle in through the neck, and I'm going to come out right in the centre of the first tailor's tack, like that. And then I'm going to take that tailor's tack thread out, because as I say, I know that that's going to cause us a problem when we come to do that. Okay, and then what I do then is take a little bite out of the fabric just to set my stitches first, and I want to come out right on the side, on the other side where that tailor's tack is. I'm going to pull my threads out again, and I can see that I've got some threads left in there. Now I've got a natty little tool like this one, which is for hiding threads in overlocker, and it's got a little latch hook on the end. And I'm just going to just very gently smooth that up through the edges of the fibres and just see if I can get hold of those. I've got one out, and I'm just kind of trying to hook those threads out so that they don't stay in the body. So there's going to be ways that you can actually get those threads out, but as I say, I'll have put something in the video to tell you to use a coordinating thread, not a contrast thread, and you shouldn't have this problem. But if you have, this is how I fix it. Again, I've said to you before, it's not about not going wrong if this is going wrong, but it's about working out how you can fix things. Okay. This one might end up being Pere Hiver then, when the faux fur for his beard will hide all of that. Right, so we've got a stitch either side. So let's go back in again this side and go back through back to the other place. So we've got our two eye positions marked. Now I'm going to thread a button on, in and out. So I don't hold my eyes against my head when I'm doing it. I get my needle position, my fabric position, my thread position first, and then that helps me then when I'm coming through. So let's go through to this other side now. That'll hold on. I might not have enough thread here, we'll see. I'll show you what to do if you don't have enough thread, if we get to that stage. So a bite of the thing, and then this is the challenging bit, to come back out through one of the holes in one of the buttons, because we want 2 or 3 stitches to hold those buttons on. And it's just a little bit of trial and error, just until you can go from one side to the other to get your buttons to be held on nicely. We do cinch these in just a little bit as we're stitching. So again, I'm going through from one side, one hole, and I'm coming out on the other hole and the other one. This puts a little glint in their eye as well, doesn't it, with the white thread. You can use black if you prefer. Okay, so I am going to run out of thread. So I'm going to just carry on just doing my little knots. Somebody asked me this question the other day, what to do if you haven't got enough thread. So I've just pushed that in, they've just cinched in slightly. So I'm going to put some pressure on my thread now, because then that will pull the end, when I snip it, that'll pull the end back inside. And you might say, well, I've not knotted that off, and you're quite right, I haven't. But what I'm going to do now is take another piece of thread, oops, make it longer than the first one, oops, learn my lesson. And I'm going to start exactly as the same as I have done already. But if you think about it, we've already got half the stitches through the eye anyway, so we don't need to worry too much about doing so many this time. But it'll just anchor in what we've already done. So let's start again. So I'm just going to take a stitch out of the stuffing, oops, just so that I don't pull too hard. So it just holds it inside there, and another stitch just to hold that. Now I'm going to go in through the neck and find one of the holes in one of the eyes, like that. So I've gone in through the neck, come out through one of the eyes, and just pull it just so that it's holding. It doesn't have to be too tight. And now I'm going to go through the other hole in the eye, and then find a hole, and I'm just going to do 2 or 3. Make sure you've not got any loops on your eyes. I don't need to cinch it in anymore, because the original stitches cinched in those eyes. out through the head. And this is just a trial and error bit. Just have to be patient with these. Same as doing the main lunars, isn't it? They always have a bit of an issue trying to get through the holes. Okay. So this is going to be my last one. So if you think I did 3 or 4 stitches with the first lot of thread, and then I had to end that one, and then I've just done 2 or 3 stitches now with this second thread, just so that it reinforces those ends. Make sure you've not got any loops in the centre of your eyes. And now I'm going to go through the eye, but I'm going to come back out through the neck, through the stuffing in the neck. Push that through. And now I'm going to take 2 or 3 stitches again in the body of this stuffing at the bottom here, which will just hold that end in place for me and not pull it out. Oops, don't go through the neck edge, make sure you're just going through the stuffing, and then when you're at the end you can just do a surgeon's knot, which is to go through twice, and that should help. And then I'm just going to then go back out through the head so it gives it a nice long tail. Put a little bit of pressure on your needle, just on your thread, and then do a snip and it'll just pull it through. And there we've got our eyes on. Okay, so the next thing then is to do our nose. So you can go ahead and just do all of your eyes. I'll have a different needle, I think, and just for my noses. That's a nice one for embroidery floss. You want one with quite a big eye so that you can get your embroidery floss through. So what we're going to do now, and you might not have worked with embroidery floss before, this is exciting, isn't it? We're going to take a nice piece of thread and snip it off. And you might not know, but embroidery floss is what's called stranded. So if you just bang your finger on the end, you'll see that those threads will separate out. And you might think you need to pull on all 3 at one time. Don't do that. Just separate out one, and then holding the rest in your hand, just pull on that one thread all the way through, and you'll see it bunching up in your hand. But as soon as you let go, it all unknots again. If you try and pull 3 out in one go, you will have a problem because it will all knot up. So there's 1, there's 2. Put the ends together just roughly, so we've got those, and I just need 1 more. And there's 1 more. So now what I do now with the 3 strands I've got left, I just thread that back onto my embroidery floss wrap. Oops. And then I keep the end just in that bottom bit just there, look, so that I know where the end is. And I know that's my next piece. And I take the ends of all 3. This is going to be interesting now, because although I've not ravelled them up already, then I might be about to. Take the 3 ends. I've got 2 at the moment. And I'm just smoothing them, and as you smooth them down on the fingers, the fibres just kind of knit together again and make that into your 3 strands. But if you try and take all 3 off in one go, it really will knot up. Ask me how I know. After years of working with my cross stitch and my embroideries, I know exactly that's how it goes. So let's thread that onto the end, and let's do our quilter's knot again on the end here. So remember to look on my video if you want to see how to do that quick and easy knot that just gives you a nice knot every time. And again, we're going to go through the neck edge here. Well, we'll take a little bite again out of the thread here just to hold that knot in. And if you've ever struggled with trying to get your characters' faces sewn but without causing any threads to come out or be worrying that they're going to come out, then this is what you need to do. So do that little thing, because that's now anchored that in there. Then we take another stitch. Now there's a picture in here that shows us how to do, I'm just going to do a simple cross on the end of the nose, and then in step 7, and then we can also see that on Mary just there as well. Look, just a little cross. So that's what all we're going to be doing. So we're going to come up to one side of where the tailor's tack is, I don't want to be too big. So don't pull too hard on your threads, and then go in, but then come out again straight away. So you're doing your little stitch across the top of the nose, trying to go equal, so try and have it level and an equal amount. And then we're going to go back in again, level and an equal amount. And then we're going to come back down into the neck edge here and come out here again. So this is why I like doing my faces at this stage, because I think that you can get access to your the stuffing inside, which does help you just anchor everything in place. So now I'm just taking out my threads for my tailor's tacks, and I will have that extra step that hopefully I've saved you from, of just getting the threads out that are discolouring it all. So there we've got a little cross on the end of our nose with our head, and that one's done then. I mean, she does say you can go back and redo it. I mean, this is where you need to make sure as well that your nose is nicely stuffed. So you can always just go back in again and just move some of your stuffing around if you need to, just to make sure that that nose is nice and firm. That looks really sweet, doesn't it? So I'm off to do all three the same way. If you get yours to the same stage, I mean, again, we're just with finishing this thread off. I've got to decide. I don't think I'm going to go over mine again, so that's fine. So I'm just going to do, once you're happy with yours, then just do a couple more stitches again in the neck edge like this. And then I just do a little stitch. And just wrap your thread round twice and then pull it tight, and that's your little surgeon's knot. And then I just leave a little tail, which I will then finger and thumb and just keep that just right in the neck edge so it doesn't show. Okay, so I'm off to fish out some threads, because I can see one or two I've got in there down the bottom here, and then I will then be doing my other two heads. So come to me then, and then we'll be on to our bodies.